evening, everyone. It is OTJtv, and it's obviously often fallacious mode. But I make a lot of mistakes. One thing that I did not make as a mistake tonight is asking my friend, Dr. Andrew Robertson, to come to OTJtv and talk to us about what he does. Andrew, thank you very much.
Hi, Jose. Thanks for inviting me on.
I actually called you Andrew, which I don't normally do. Is it okay if I just refer to you as Andy, because that's what I
Yes,
usually
of
do?
course. Yes, everybody
Okay.
calls me Andy. Yes.
Just a quick introduction. Tell us about yourself in the way that you want to introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm from the UK. I came here about 20 something years ago, straight after getting my PhD. I came here for just 1 year to do research, and that was too long. I only wanted to come for 3 months. And then I got sucked in, as a lot of us do. And as part of that, I got involved with English teaching and took a break from chemistry. Ran my own English school for about 9 years or so. Did science writing and things as a business, and science paper corrections. And then I had an idea about the science of life and what that line is between a dead pile of chemicals and a living organism. And I really wanted to get back into it. And I really wanted to get into a laboratory and investigate it and things. So just over 10 years ago, I was fortunate to be looking to get back in, just as Japanese universities were looking to get foreign faculty on board. And so here I am at Kyushu University.
Most of the professors, the PhDs that I know in Japan, especially in a group like Online Teaching Japan, are EFL instructors, trained ESL instructors, some of them, but mostly are language specialists.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can shine a bit of a light on what it's actually like being an expert in sciences as opposed to an expert in language education working in Japan. Is it something that you think would be different if you were, say, doing chemistry instruction or doing research in Britain or wherever else in the West? Is life fairly different for you because you're working as a non-Japanese in a Japanese university?
Yeah.
Make
Yes.
it short.
And yeah, I mean, you know, it turns out that despite everything everyone says, being an ethnic minority is tough. And the harder part, of course, is Japanese is a really tough language to learn, as of course everybody knows. I mean, my estimate would be that you have to do a degree's worth of study to be able to be properly fluent. So as well as having that outsiderness that you have as a foreigner here, you also don't have the language functionality. So you have this double blow against yourself. On the one hand, people, and not just Japanese people, but people around the world, are more comfortable employing somebody that looks like they do. And then when you double that up by giving them, not, an excuse, a reason to not promote you and not employ you, it makes things very difficult. And it really is tough. I mean, I think things might be different between the sciences and languages in the sense that, as certainly, an EFL teacher, an EFL lecturer, you are the expert, and they really do need you to be doing this thing and teaching this course or whatever. So of course the expectation is that you will be a foreign lecturer, whereas here you're somebody that's we're kind of here as box tickers, to be honest. And we're here as people that they can show off. um, and we're not really here for the science. At least that's the way that they perceive it, or at least that's the impression it's possible to get. And that means that, yeah, it definitely is harder here than it would be back
Y-
home.
You feel that these sort of disadvantages are upon you, even at your place of work, that you're kind of the token non-Japanese chemist on staff kind of thing?
Yeah. It seems to be a common situation from the people I've spoken to, not just here, not just um, here, but at other universities around Japan. You know, I'm sure you guys all know about the Dejima effect, the idea that, you know, we'll have a special project, we'll get a bunch of international teachers in, and there's your office, and we'll see you around. And that that does seem to be a common problem around the country, I think.
I'll be very honest with you. I've never heard of the Dejima effect. Is that
Oh, right.
some professor who did this to some other guy, or I don't really know what it is. If you could explain
Okay.
it really quickly.
All right. So, as you may know, Dejima was the small island just off of Nagasaki, where foreigners were allowed to come while Japan had closed its borders.
That
Just
Dejima. Okay.
before the Meiji, right?
Hmm.
So I read this in an article about academic teaching in Japan, and I was recruited for a project called the G30 project. So this was a big investment by the Japanese government to bring in international staff to national universities. And this was an article, this Dejima effect. I've read about that in an article, I think, in the Japan Times, talking about how the G30 project was going and the problems with it. And reading about that in the Japan Times was something that made me think, wow, there's people dealing with this, not just me. And it it can be a real problem. It's not a problem for everybody, but it's easy for us to fall into that trap. Now, I do need to say, however, that I have also benefited from it.
Mm.
Because as I said, I took these 9 years away from research, and to do that and then come back into research is extraordinarily difficult. And I don't know if I probably wouldn't have been able to do that back in the UK. So I've got this kind of peculiar situation where, yes, I'm benefiting from that project, but at the same time, that's holding me back from going as far as I think I could go if I was somewhere else.
You're mostly in research or in instruction at your university? Oh,
That's very much a matter of controversy at the moment.
all right.
It's controversial because theoretically I'm here mostly as a teacher, as an educator. And the benefits of that is that I don't have the pressure on me to publish and get research grants that the other staff have, the full-on research staff. So that is very much something which is in my favor. And I'm sure there are plenty of other staff here that would be jealous of my situation.
Mm.
But the flip side is that we don't actually have a proper educational career structure here, at least not in my faculty or in most of the faculties at the university. So what we are still judged by publications and research grants.
Okay.
So I don't have the time, I don't have the resources to get the number of publications and grants that the researchers have. So therefore, I don't have the career opportunities that they do either. But at the same time, I don't have the responsibilities. So it's yes, it's a kind of a peculiar situation.
I'd like to know more about it. I mean, I've always been kind of fascinated with the idea that one of my friends is not an English teacher, he's a chemistry teacher. And I've always wanted to talk to you a bit more about that. And it would be nice if we could talk about it a bit. But I mostly wanted to bring you on because I know that in the last year or so, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
you moved on to something that was kind of interesting for me because if you may allow me to just give a bit of background why I found it fascinating is that about 2 or 3 years ago, I remember that you used to be on Facebook and you used to have a presence on Facebook and would participate. And then you, not unlike some of my other friends, actually just sort of announced, look, I'm leaving social media. I've had it. This is a cesspool. And you said, that's it for me. I'm leaving Facebook. And you did. And I regretted the fact that you had to do so, but I understood because I found a lot of the stuff you posted very, very intelligent, especially when it came to stuff about science. And then you reappeared, and then even you started talking to me a bit about microphones and stuff. And then you came into YouTube with your own science communication channel. So you went from leaving social media, being the pile of hooey that it really is, and I agree that it is, and then you actually started participating in it with your YouTube channel, 326, the link to which I will post in just a moment.
Right.
By the way, before I forget completely, I always forget this until a good chunk of time has passed. If you have the wherewithal, please join us in the Zoom room. Click the link in the event, the Facebook event, and join us here. Otherwise, I will also click or I paste the link to this Zoom room directly into the Facebook live stream. If you want to stay in the Facebook live stream, but you want to ask Andy a question, please use the comments thread to tell me what to ask him. So you went from there, you went to making 326, a YouTube channel. What the heck happened there? Why did you go from leaving social media to actually being a big part of social media?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a confluence of coincidences. So in the first place, you know, as I'm walking around, I've always got things going on about my lessons, and I'm sure you all do as educators, and they say, oh, I could explain this thing this way, and I'd always, what we don't have much of on YouTube is many kind of casual chemistry channels. So there's lots of physics ones. There's like Veritasium, for example, is a very famous channel. There's Science Asylum, which is another physics one. There's a whole bunch of physics channels that just do interesting science stuff. Smarter Every Day is another one. But not really anything chemistry related. There's one, it's called the Periodic Table of Videos, which is fantastic, and I thoroughly recommend it. But they don't really go into the nitty gritty of the chemistry much. And I always thought, I should do this. I should put up some videos. And of course, in my head, until you've actually done anything on YouTube, the way it goes in your head is, well, one lunchtime, I'll take a camera out, I'll explain chemical equilibria for maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Then I'll edit that video and put it up on YouTube. Take me like 30 minutes to edit it, put it on YouTube, and that'll be done. And that'll be like something I can do with my occasional lunchtime once or twice a week. And of course, it's not like that, right? But that was always an idea I had. And then 2 years ago, we're required here, and it might be the same at your place, but we're certainly required here as a public university to apply for CAC-NH grants every year. So these government research grants, and you don't have a choice. I was super busy, and I was just getting my research project ready. I knew it would fail the grant application if I applied then, and I was sure I would get it the next year. So I just took out an old application, dusted it off, changed the dates. This was an old, why don't I make videos application. Dusted it off, changed the dates, and sent it off with the expectation that it would be rejected.
Right.
And I got it.
Is that it?
Oh,
you got a CAC-NH grant for this.
Jose, I got to tell you, I was so angry.
Because now you actually had to follow through.
Yeah, yeah, and the way it between you and I, the way it
And the
usually
rest of
works,
OTJ, but okay, go ahead.
and the rest of OTJ, the way it usually works is you put in a proposal, but once you get the money, you can kind of tinker things a bit. You could say, look, that's what I wanted to do, but now I've done a bit more research into it. I'll have to change this a little bit.
The data set has changed. Yes, yes.
Yeah, but you cannot go from I'm going to make educational chemistry videos to I'm going to
electron microscopy. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. So I had to do the videos, and honestly, I was fuming. I mean, it's a classic example of be careful what you wish for.
Wow.
And so yeah, so my research has had to go on the back burner for the last year, and probably for the next year or two as well. And I'm focusing on this, but I'm making the most of it. And if this works out, then maybe this will be what I'm doing, and it might be a better way forward than the research. So
every video I see of you, and I thoroughly enjoy your videos, the ones I see, I will admit that I do not watch all of them because some of it just shoosh right over my head. But some of the stuff that you do is actually quite entertaining and enlightening. And you always look like you're enjoying it. So are you enjoying making these videos, or are you still fuming that you have to do them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I love talking about chemistry and science in general. It makes me excited, and it's the kind of thing I can talk about for hours.
Right.
What I don't enjoy is the situation that I had, in fact, with the video that I'm working on now, which will be coming out within the next week or so. So I'm working on a video all about the chemistry of crystals and how they work, how we can make them, and that kind of thing. And again, super busy, running short of time. I decided to make the video without writing a script first. I thought, I know crystals, I know everything about them. I'm just going to sit in front of the camera, talk about them for 20 minutes, we'll be done. And of course, it ended up being a horrible mess because I talked about this thing, then I talked about this thing over here, then I'd forgotten that I hadn't explained that thing properly. And, all the editing and stuff that has to go into it. And talking to the camera, it's never as simple as that.
That's right.
You're making a 40-minute video, and it's going to take me 2 hours to record that video.
Oh, at least.
So, yeah.
I'm still reeling about the fact that you actually ended up doing this even when you didn't want to. You thought you weren't at all going to do it. Let's go on to talking about the whole nature of science communication, though. You could have been talking just about chemistry, but in the end, I think what I sense is that you sort of have a little, or you've taken on a self-appointed mandate to actually sort of burst through a few bubbles about what people have as maybe misconceptions about chemistry or science in general. Am I wrong?
Yeah. So the kind of strap line for 326 is chemistry, science, and life. And those three things are intimately connected. So, of course, chemistry is a part of science. So chemistry is my specialty. That's what I'm going to focus on. But I'm also a scientist. So the broad area, the broad area of science is, something that I understand to a level that most people don't. And I feel that I can bring that to them and make it accessible to them. But then once we understand these topics of science, we understand things about, for example, how society works in a scientific way, then that must have implications for life and the way that we live our lives. And those three things are connected. So it seems important for me to, at some point, come around and have discussions on things like better ways of living, ways of approaching the news, for example, how to find trustworthy sources in the news, and all of this thing is connected to science. So yeah.
A lot of the work that we do in English also takes on those responsibilities too, which is to make sure that our students know what is obviously crap, fake news on the internet, and is there to sell you, I don't know, crystals or whatever else that is just basically a bunch of BS. So we do understand the need for critical thinking, but in your line of work, in your encounter, or the things that you think that you want to say to people, I'm going to ask this as a two-part question. So the first part, what do you think as you go through the making of videos of 326 and the planning of them, that the average person, not necessarily English professors, but the average person needs to understand about science itself, or what they think is science is not really what science is, or a major misconception that you think you want to address, or you find yourself having to address a lot?
The number one principle thing is what science really is and how it really works. Because people understandably have a huge misconception about science. And the way that I think lots of people think it works is that there are a relatively small number of pretty much old men who write textbooks, and then what they've written is science. And of course, in that situation, once you've written a textbook, at some point, a textbook is going to be wrong. That's the nature of progress.
Yes.
And so people then get the idea that scientists are wrong and therefore they are untrustworthy. But in fact, what science really is a massive argument. It's a massive, continually moving argument that is happening in science journals all the time. And of course, it's generally more polite than what you would have on an internet forum. But at least what is the ideal of this big argument that we are having in our journals is that we are basing our arguments on facts and evidence that we are bringing to the table and presenting. But what it is not is these people writing a textbook and then holding up the textbook and saying, this is science. And I understand why people get that impression, because that's what it is at school. When you're at school, you've got a textbook, and what's in the textbook is right. And if you write anything different in your exam paper, then you are wrong. But that is not what happens in real science. So we are continually arguing. And what actually happens is, even when scientists are wrong, and of course, all scientists are going to be wrong about something at some point in their lives. And maybe a few scientists might be wrong about a lot of things for a lot of their lives. But the community moves. And what will happen is that if we go from a point, an example we can take, if we go back to the late 19th century, this was the point where chemists, scientists were starting to think, hang on, maybe everything really is made of tiny bits. Let's call them atoms. And maybe that's what's going on. But the wider science community was saying, well, that's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, because if you take a piece of cheese, you can cut it in half, and then you take that half, you can cut that in half. And then you cut that bit in half, you can cut that bit in half. Why on earth wouldn't you be able to do that forever? And when you get down to this atom of cheese, what then? You can just cut that atom of cheese in half. Idiot. Right? And that's
you looked right at me when you said that. Thank you.
But that's how this discussion was going on in the late 19th century, in the last kind of 10 years of the 19th century. And it turns out that even some of the biggest chemists of that day were absolutely against the existence of atoms. And when atoms come together, they make molecules, atoms and molecules. They were convinced they didn't exist. What actually happens in situations like that is that these famous old scientists either retire or die.
Right.
And
Thomas
then the
Kuhn.
new ones come in. But what is important is that the community moves.
Mhm.
So with the pandemic, for example, that was a fantastic example, because when it kicked off, we already had lots of epidemiologists, the people responsible for looking at how diseases spread through populations and things. We had so many computer simulations. We had so much experience of things like Ebola viruses. We'd had the SARS viruses earlier this century. The argument kicked off. I mean, it was a huge argument. Should we be wearing masks or not wearing masks was an obvious one. Should we be locking down or not locking down? Somebody want to turn their microphone off?
My microphone? That's not my microphone.
That's somebody's microphone.
That's your microphone. Nobody else's microphone is on.
Well, it's definitely not my end. Anyway,
Well, somebody's microphone was
nobody
on. I
talking
looked
about
up and the
bentos.
microphones are off. Okay, somebody's gonna get a really good bento tomorrow, though. But I think that's good. Okay, so, oh no, it was Glenn.
All right.
Okay, keep going, buddy. Sorry.
So what happened was, and I was watching this all the way through. I was reading it all the way through. And I, for my own self, was COVID-19 going to be a problem? Were masks a good idea or not? Were lockdowns going to be useful or destructive? And I was watching the conversation change. And this is exactly what happened. The individual scientists did not change their minds, but the community eventually gelled around this idea. First of all, COVID was actually going to be serious and was more dangerous than influenza. Number two, masks are effective. And number three, lockdowns have saved millions and millions of lives. And that's what we can rely on. And we can rely on it because it's an argument. And we might not want to trust individual scientists, but we can trust the community. That's what I really want people to take home.
I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who pointed out that people's misconception about science is that it is a static body of knowledge. And what it actually is, it's a process to coming to a greater understanding of the nature of reality. It's a process, that it's not a body of knowledge. And I think a lot of the people that you were pointing out who are going, yeah, but you guys said last week that masks don't work. What's going on? You bunch of assholes. You like tell us the truth. What are you hiding from us? I think that comes from what you just pointed out, the idea that people don't understand that it's a moving argument, and that that moving argument doesn't even exist even at the individual level, because as you said, that paradigm that disappears only when certain people die off or they retire. Very, very few scientists, I think, but even fewer politicians actually end up saying, I was wrong. That's just the way it was back then. And I thought that, but I was wrong. And now I think this. Although, what do you think? I mean, you know a lot more about chemistry research than I do. I don't find that I see a lot of scientists. Of course, I've met a few that just go on and ahead and admit that I was wrong back then. And now I'm with the community, and the community has admitted that this is the truth.
Yeah, well, the problem is, I mean, with some situations, it's cut and dried. This is clearly what's true. That is not what's true. But with most of them, it's a matter of interpreting data. So we're coming back to this idea of the existence of atoms and molecules, for example. Once you introduce this idea of atoms and molecules, so much of chemistry becomes so much simpler. and you can explain so many more things. But if you're determined to not believe it, then you can still do a lot of chemistry. And what that means is that, yeah, I mean, some scientists will be forced into a climb down, but they probably won't want to do that publicly. They'll just stop publishing in that area, and they'll probably just go quiet. So, but there was a very famous one in the field of climate science, going back, I think, about 15 years or so. I'll find the chap's name, actually, because this could be important.
A climate scientist or a climate change
climate scientist who had set up a research project to prove that climate change was not caused by fossil fuels.
Oh, okay. So,
and that was, I'm just looking through I've got it bookmarked right here. Here we go. And he was sure that he could do it. He was, it's paywalled.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's paywalled. I'll give you the title of the article is The Conversion of a Climate Skeptic. I think it's New York Times.
Okay.
And The Conversion of a Climate Skeptic. So this was a guy who, very prominent climate scientist, who was convinced that fossil fuels were not responsible for climate change. So what he had to do then was find out what was responsible. And there was lots of ideas about, heating from the sun and other possibilities. Maybe the data was wrong, things like that. And ultimately, he couldn't do it. He could not reproduce the continual heating of our atmosphere without including the contribution from carbon dioxide that we release from fossil fuels. And he had to come out and admit that he'd been wrong. Now, he kind of tempered that by saying it's not going to be as bad as people say it is, because, it's hard to just come out and say you're wrong. But in fact, the way it's turned out is so far it's been worse than everybody said. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does happen, but humans are human, right?
Speaking of humans, let me ask you the second part of my two-part question. So the average person in the street would do better by understanding that science, the nature of science, is actually a process of discovery as opposed to a body of knowledge. What do you feel in your in your workings with teachers who are not necessarily scientists? So people like me, especially me, because I don't even have an advanced degree. I only have my Bachelor of Arts. But the people in literature or people in history, a lot of them do have a good, strong grasp of, the Socratic discourse and the concept of the dialectic, the thesis, the antithesis, the synthesis. But what do you think, from your point of view, is the thing that most professional educators could do better by understanding this about science? So normal people, this is what they need to know. But people who are actually working as instructors in universities, what do you find that they would be better off by acknowledging or understanding?
I mean, I can't think of anything that I would specifically say for educators as separate to the general public, except for the fact that they do have a higher responsibility to understand these topics, because, even a throwaway comment in a classroom can have an effect on young people. If they, just by standing at the front of the class and being a teacher, you have a level of respect that other people in their environment don't have.
Right.
And so if you're going to throw out some comment about masks being useless against COVID, or some comment about fossil fuels don't cause climate change, then, these young people are going to listen to your opinion and take it very seriously, which means that you do have a responsibility to check up on what you're talking about. And that means getting your news and science and scientific opinions from credible experts. And that means not blogs and not not YouTube.
Oops. No, you got there. YouTube, do you still think that social media is generally a cesspool?
I mean, if in general, well, this is the thing. Generally, yes, it's a cesspool, but it also gives an opportunity for educators, quality educators, and quality communicators to get out there and reach people that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to reach. And in my opinion, I think the problem is that we do not have regulation of social media. And I think we do need that, because I think there's a confusion between the need for free speech and the need for truthful free speech. Because when we have just free speech, well, anybody can say any damaging thing. And the problem then is that it is 100 times easier to lie than it is to say the truth. Right? If, let's take COVID as an example. So we've got this deadly disease. Literally, the Omicron variant is the most infectious disease science has ever seen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now, we can take that, and for me as a science communicator, I've got to think before I start talking about COVID. So I'm actually keeping most of my information to simple things that I know are facts. But as somebody who's just trying to generate traffic to their social media sites, people who are trying to sell merchandise, you can say anything you like, because you don't have to consult any textbooks. You don't have to ask for any expert opinion. Whatever is in your head can just come straight out your mouth. And then it turns out that the more damaging it is, the more that it shocks people and scares people, the more they'll come back. So we have this commercial incentive now for people to lie, and for people to make people angry and fearful. And of course, and we've got so many people running around say, well, that's free speech. But that is not a good thing for society. So we do need some kind of regulation. And once we have freedom of truthful speech as a principle, then I think we will clear up a lot of problems. Now, of course, that kind of moves the argument now. Then what do you define as truthful speech? How do you enforce it? What should that regulation be? But at least having that principle and saying that there should be consequences for issuing damaging lies will move this kind of informational nightmare and start, patching up a lot of the damage that social media is doing to our society.
Let's go with just a little bit of what you were suggesting there. The whole argument, you're right, is full of bear traps. But the definition of truthful free speech, or how do we even begin to navigate that mire in terms of saying, well, this is how you understand truth, without it falling into under the control of politicians who have their own agendas, or under the control of other social powers that have their own agenda. How do you think we would actually promote the creation of a definition, much less the more difficult part of the regulation and the enforcement of it?
Well, I mean, it's clearly difficult, but there are some things that you can say. Number one, have you got any evidence for this? So if you're saying, for example, the government has put microchips into vaccines to control people, which people are out there actually saying, have you got any evidence for this? Have you got, well, actually, no, it really is a lot simpler because we already have a process for determining whether people are telling the truth or not, and they're called courts. And you have a situation, somebody says that person robbed me and took my money, and the other person will say, no, I didn't. And we have that system for finding the truth. The question is, where do you start dragging people before a court? And that is something that I think, certainly different countries will differ on where that should be, but I certainly think that damaging lies are a point where we should start saying somebody's got to pay for that, or at least, well, somebody has to pay for it in some way. So if somebody is saying the government is putting microchips into vaccines, that's a damaging lie. And if you are given the opportunity to provide evidence, and you are allowed to provide that evidence, and that is an open process, then that is something that we should be able to trust. So, for example, in totalitarian countries, let's suppose we've got a totalitarian country where they really are maybe not, they wouldn't be injecting microchips, but they would perhaps be giving operations to people and literally putting microchips under people's arms.
Mm-hmm.
If that was a truthful situation and the government was trying to cover it up, they would not give you the opportunity to provide your evidence. You would not be allowed to go, well, hey, look, here's an x-ray, here's the chip right under my skin. You would not be allowed to go to the medical records of wherever it was that performed that operation. So, I don't think, what I'm certainly not talking about is a situation where, I say something, I'm trying to think of,
An example of like people going to courts and trying to hash it out in the court. Is that what you're trying to think?
No, in other words, I'm not saying that, trivial lies, and we have a situation. If we take example, the difference between the UK and American libel laws, for example. So this is very much a case of people being penalized for not speaking the truth. Now, in America, you are allowed to say anything as long as you are not aware that it's a lie, or that you have not said it with callous disregard for the truth. That's the two tests for American libel laws and whether you can say something about something. So, for example, if I were to say, okay, Jose is an alien, he's a lizard with, some human face mask on. Let's say you were to sue me for that. Well, if I really don't care, if I've got some kind of reason for that, if they've got some kind of reasoning for it, I'm allowed to say it. But if I've said it just to hurt you, for example, if I've said it for my own personal gain, and I know it's not true, then you've got a case. In the UK, it's quite different. In the UK, the situation is I have to prove it. Now, let's say we are talking about a situation where now I'm saying something. I say, for example, well, this is a classic one in the UK, actually. We've got some alternative medicine, fake medicine practitioner.
I wanted to talk about that a bit tonight. Go on.
Who is claiming that their super medication will defeat COVID. I say that person's lying. Now they can sue me and I have to prove they were lying in court. I have to prove that they knew it wasn't working and they didn't just believe it was working. And I think here you've got two extremes. I think on the one hand, with the American libel laws, people are allowed to say some very damaging things, and it's freedom of speech. Things which are bad for society and have a serious negative effect on society. For example, Donald Trump is allowed to go around saying that the election was stolen from him in 2020. In the UK, the situation where you have to prove what you've said, even though it is so obvious to everybody, basically means that people with the money can just shut up anybody. And we had a serious situation with a famous celebrity called Jimmy Savile back in the UK, who sexually assaulted and raped dozens of children, and nobody could do anything about it because the papers couldn't touch it. They had to be able to prove it in court if they were going to report it, and they couldn't. So we have these two extremes. And of course, there must be a place in the middle where we can deal with these serious situations, and where scientists should be able to come out and say, well, not just come out and say, hang on, this alternative medicine is a load of rubbish, it doesn't work, but also those people selling this so-called alternative medicine you should be able to bring them up to a court and say, okay, either stop saying that or prove that it works, because the principle of truthful speech should be enforced, free, truthful speech. And of course, there's going to be gray areas. There's going to be gray areas where, does homeopathic medicine work, for example? Well, it does, but it's a placebo effect. And if we understand that it's a placebo effect, then fine. But that's going to be an argument that's going to go on and on.
On that point, because I often think about the idea that I had a friend who was actually quite a good friend of mine through my university days. And we ended up sort of like separating from each other over Facebook, because I would, as you know, occasionally post things like, homeopathy doesn't work. It's all a big scam and just pretty direct stuff. And they were very adamant in defending homeopathy to me, and they would say, no, it does work. Look at what happened. We applied a homeopathic salve to my dog's cut, and it healed. And I said, come on, are you sure that wasn't just because it was a light cut and it healed by itself? Because a cut can heal by itself. No, it was homeopathy. And she was a lot stricter on the idea that homeopathy is great, as opposed to her husband, who would say something like, yeah, I know it's a placebo effect, but that's fine. Like if that's the case, it's worth it for me to actually go ahead and purchase this. To what degree do you think do we have as a problem the fact that almost sometimes people enjoy being fooled, that they like sort of these reassuring lies, like the idea that the stars and the planets, their movement actually affect your life, and today's a good day to buy a lottery ticket because Jupiter is in that part of the sky. To what degree is that actually harmful? I mean, is it harmful to actually believe in stuff like that?
Yeah, I'm just looking for a pen because there's three things.
Let me lend you this one.
Make sure I don't forget it. My pen's on my other desk. It's all the way over there.
You want to go get it?
No, I'm fine.
All right,
I'm just going to go through this. So we have a few problems here, and the fundamental problem we have here is a hardware problem. And when I say hardware, I mean what's hardwired into our brains. It's very tempting to think of these people as somehow stupid, and they aren't. And as you mentioned on the poster, I used to be a creationist. In fact, I was till I was 26. I'd got my PhD as a creationist, and it wasn't until I came here, I came out of that kind of environment of being surrounded by other creationists, and I was on my own for a year, and things started crumbling. So I know very much from the inside what's going on in these people's minds, and not just theirs, all of us,
Mhm.
all of us, and all of you. So we've got two basic hardware problems. And these are things that we're supposed to have, by the way. They're things that help us function in our daily lives, but they can go wrong. Like when a Tesla hits the back of a fire truck, the Tesla's doing everything it was programmed to do, but in that situation, there's a horrible accident. So
Right.
what I'm talking about here, number one, uh, we have our certain worldview, and we hate to change it. It is physically painful to change that worldview. So it's called cognitive dissonance.
Mm.
And where you have this worldview and you are confronted with evidence that your worldview is wrong, changing that worldview is physically painful. And we have it from all kinds of things. In my case, I was a creationist. In other people's cases, Prime Minister Liz Truss, Prime Minister of the UK right now, her belief that cutting taxes for rich people and cutting benefits for poor people would make the British economy stronger, that was something she could only believe in. And since then, it's turned out that nobody else agrees with her except for a very small number of voters in her party. And it's really hard for us to change that.
Okay.
Really hard. Then the second hardware problem that we have is when presented with two conflicting bits of evidence, we'll go for the one that makes us feel happier, the one that we prefer. So, for example, should we have lockdowns or not have lockdowns? Well, hey, I don't want to have lockdowns. There's all these stories in these boring newspapers that say lockdowns save millions of lives, or there's this one guy's blog over here that tells us it's not necessary. I'm going to believe him because I don't want the lockdowns. I don't want to wear a mask. Oh, look, there's one story there that says masks aren't going to work against COVID-19. I'll skip these 20 stories that tell me masks are necessary, and I'll go straight to that one that tells me what I want to hear. So that is our first problem. Certainly, if you've grown up in an environment of fake medicine, you will be more inclined to keep that worldview and keep going along those rails. Second, alternative medicine, it has a wonderful benefit that makes people feel happy, which is that we are all experts. Okay, there is nobody in this chat room now who is not an expert on homeopathy, balancing chakras, crystal energy, or anything. All of you are every bit as much of an expert on that as anybody else. You can't be wrong. You cannot be wrong. Anything you can say will work. Somebody's got, your friend's dog had a cut. Well, homeopathic solution of St. John's wort. Now, that is as good advice as anybody else's. Or maybe a jade bracelet. That would work just as well as any other kind of fake medicine. So we all get to feel like experts. And then we have the added bonus as well that we can take control of our medication and our health problems. I know a lot about that because I'm diabetic. So I've seen a lot of doctors in my time. And, it kind of makes you feel weak and helpless sometimes, especially if you've got something pain related, if you've got migraines, for example, and you go to one doctor and another doctor and another doctor, and they say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. But then you can just spend 10 minutes on YouTube, become an expert in crystal healing energies, and well, now you can fix your migraines. And that gives you this kind of sense of power back. So you get that positive bonus. You get to hear something that you want to hear. You also hear somebody telling you, yes, I can fix that, which is something that you want to hear, because they never tell you they can't fix it, because
No money in that.
well, for those two reasons. Number one, the people that really believe it believe they can fix anything because they don't realize they can be wrong. But number two, those people at the top who know exactly what they're doing, the people really making the money from it, yeah, they won't make money from telling somebody that they can't help them.
Mm.
So there was that, and there was the third thing that I was going to say. Problems, hardware problems. No, I think that was.
While you're thinking about that, maybe this might help jog your memory. I think I was reading something in the newspaper that said, which made me laugh even more about the whole idea about crystals, because, you know, people do believe that crystals actually clean the air and stuff. But because you're a chemist, you can, I don't know if I'm wrong, but you might not confirm this at all. But it was interesting to me that was pointed out that it's interesting that people say that, yeah, crystals give off a certain vibrational energy. But what's interesting about that is that crystals are crystals because they've lost all of their energy, and that's why they're crystals. Is that
right? Well, that was my YouTube video, Jose.
Oh, was that your YouTube video? No, I thought I saw that somewhere else. Maybe it was because I watch it's the things that I learned from your YouTube channel. It's just amazing.
That was my latest video. So on my channel, I also do a couple of shorts, which are just for a bit of fun, just a bit of entertainment. So there's a character called One Man. He's the one man that can save the world from science and all that stuff.
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
And then there's another character who's called Scientist, who's trying to kind of talk sense to him. So maybe you did see this somewhere else, Jose. Maybe you did, but it's also on
one of yours. And like, see, I can get everything I need just by talking to you.
It's just gone up. But yeah. But I mean, one of the things that this is what makes all of this, not just alternative medicine, but all of this kind of science bokeh all comes together. As I said before, it's so much easier to lie. So you can say this thing about crystal energy, crystals sending out energy vibrations, which they do not, because, as you so rightly say, they've lost their energy, and that's why they're crystals. So, but it's so easy to say that they do. And then for us as consumers, once we've heard that once, we don't even need to remember exactly what somebody actually said. If we kind of sort of remember it, that's fine, because we are no less wrong than they are. And this is what makes the science so difficult, because for science, you can't just say that. You have to prove that there is some kind of energy coming out. And most of the time there isn't. You have to put a lot of effort into that kind of thing.
Do you remember? Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, that was it. I was finished.
Okay. Do you remember back at the beginning of the pandemic when people were sort of like flustered and trying to figure out what should I do? What should I do? I sent you an email and I told you that I had actually just purchased this bracelet.
Right.
And I asked you, hey, Andy, I read this. It was from Vice. The website was Vice. And the writer said, hey, actually, you know, the whole hand washing thing is a great idea, too. But did you know that copper or silver is actually absolutely excellent in terms of like destroying all kinds of bacteria and viruses, and just contact with any kind of copper surface will actually render all of those bacteria and viruses inert. And I read that and I thought, oh, well, that's pretty interesting. And I went out and I actually immediately ordered a copper bracelet. Now I'm trying to go through my thought process. Now, why didn't I sort of think a little bit more about that, do a little bit more research on my own? And I thought to myself, I think one driving factor that can take a normally rational person, I like to think of myself as a normally rational person, and make them do kind of silly things, is fear and time pressure. And I was lucky because I had you as a friend, and I wrote you an email and said, well, what do you think about this? You said, no, it doesn't work, Jose, not unless you actually turn it into a spray. I said, okay, well, I kind of like the bracelet, so I think I'll just keep it anyway. But In terms of sort of, there's the hardware problem or the wetware problem. In terms of society, uh, fear and time pressure or any other sort of factors do you think that contribute to what I think is an incredible amount of sort of the anti-science and irrational thinking that's floating around from things like QAnon and the weird conspiracy theories that are being turned into far-right propaganda to help fuel far-right movements and stuff? Do you think that the fear and the general sort of state of panic about this around society today, it has anything to do with anything?
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what it feeds on. People like Alex Jones, for example, the whole point of where their power comes from the fact if you make people scared, you make them jump. And, your plan is to make them jump into your hoop or jump into your net, whatever, and then you've got them. And then because once they start coming back to your videos, they are going to take on your worldview. First of all, they're going to get that positive feeling of going, I know something you don't know. I'm an expert now, because it doesn't matter if they don't remember it rightly, because they're no more wrong than anybody else. So they can remember any bits of whatever. Then the more they get back into it, the more that becomes their worldview. And now they are on those railway lines and they are stuck on it. And once you're on that railway line, you will bend the rest of the world and the information coming into you to fit that worldview. So, for example, going into the 2020 elections in America, all of these Republican voters are full on believing, number one, that Donald Trump is the savior of America, and then number two, that that he's going to win the next election, because that's what everybody was saying. He's going to win it. He's going to win big. When that doesn't happen, what are they going to do? Are they going to admit, hang on, I got that wrong, people weren't so impressed by him, he failed? Or are they going to go for the lie, which is comforting and what they want to hear, which is the whole elections must have been rigged, plus all of the Republican judges and kind of legal hierarchy also in on some big conspiracy to stop the election.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other thing you do, and this is a really important point, and this is how you can think that you are a rational person, but actually you're behaving irrationally, is you start shutting down information sources that don't comply with your worldview, and you will amplify anything that does. So this was how I was able to not believe in evolution, not be convinced by evolution until I was 26 years old, because anytime I watched a program or something that mentioned evolution, I would just think, well, you've got to say that because you're an atheist. You haven't got any alternatives. But even if I heard so much as one person at my church said, oh yeah, they found a skeleton next to a dinosaur skeleton. We were long earth creationists, so we didn't actually think human skeletons and dinosaurs existed together.
Humans didn't ride dinosaurs. Okay.
But anytime somebody says, oh yeah, they've proved that evolution can't be true because so and so, if I just heard that once, boom, I would take that person as a totally credible professional.
Let me chase that for a little bit. I mean, are you okay with hanging around for just a few more minutes? Because I don't know. I was thinking about how to pursue this line of thinking, and is the idea that you got your PhD while you were still a long Earth creationist, right?
Yeah.
A PhD in chemistry.
Yeah.
So you were familiar with things like carbon dating and how you figure out the age of the Earth by basically the things that you do in chemistry.
Yeah, but that wasn't a problem, because I was a long Earth creationist and I had no problems with the Earth being 4 billion years old. My problem was specifically that I didn't believe that new organisms were evolving by random processes from more simple organisms. I was convinced that each time a new organism appeared in the fossil record, it had been created and put there by God. And, you know, I don't know if you're interested in doing this, but I can still do it. I can still do the argument that I used to have in the lab with the other people in the lab, and as to why they were wrong and I was right.
So you're talking about other physical scientists or physicists or biologists and chemists who say, Andy, I don't know where you're coming from, man. Evolution is a clear fact. We've got all kinds of evolutionary evidence. I mean, why would you possibly think that? You're a PhD in chemistry. What's going on, man?
All right, so I'm going to do it. I just need to repeat one more time. I'm not a creationist anymore.
It's cool.
Okay?
It's cool. Yeah.
But this is how it goes. So first point is, there is no actual evidence of evolution as the textbooks teach evolution. What we have in the fossil record is discrete evidence of separate species. And if you look at living organisms in the world now, what according to evolution, what we should have is thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years, millions of years even, of a situation of species A, species B, and then organisms that are in the middle of those two species that can breed with species A and breed with species B and produce viable offspring. And that is something that we don't have. So what we actually have is species A appearing, then species B appearing, then species C appearing.
Did you ever have that discussion? I'm sorry, I'm going to get mired down into the details. Is with not an anthropologist. What's the word for people who study evolution? Not biologists.
Well, I think biologists.
Biologists, okay.
Paleontologists.
Paleontologist. Okay, yeah. That maybe that's the word I'm looking for. So, did you ever have this discussion with a paleontologist and how they would explain? Yes, but Andy, look at this species. Look at the similarity of this species. We know that evolution occurred because look at their, the finger joints and whatever the evidence that they pointed out. And did you ever feel at that point that sometimes your armor was cracking, or like it was always completely solid until you got to Japan?
Yeah, it wasn't the science that made me change my mind. I might come back to that later, but the science wasn't a problem, because we've got two things here. The first point is that does not prove evolution. What you've got is species A and species B, and they look very similar. We take Darwin's finches, for example, famous example of evolution. But my position was, well, God just made the right finch for the right place. And that's what anybody would do, right? You wouldn't put a finch with the wrong shaped beak in the wrong place. And if you're making a garden, you put different plants in different places. And if you were going to create animals to populate that garden, you would create the right animal for the right place. And the right animal might be two animals that look very similar, but one has got a slightly longer beak. So, the evolution problem was really not a problem for me at all. It really wasn't a problem. And I could still argue it today if I really wanted to.
I want to take this to, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead if you want.
I want to take this to back to the idea about how we use your experience and your knowledge of how the mind works in those situations and how you sort of snapped yourself out of it in terms of how we can improve our approach to trying to repair some of the social malaise that we're witnessing in terms of understanding science and stuff like that. But just my final sort of like, I'm indulging myself here. Do you think, now that you know what you know, being as experienced as you are, if you met somebody with exactly the same line of reasoning as you were using back then, that you could talk your old self, do you have the tools now to say, no, what you're missing is this?
Yep.
You're saying that God created all of these proper pieces, but did you ever consider this? Do you have this now as a weapon to hold up against that line of reasoning?
Yeah. Yes. Simply. Now, the one thing that you really need to understand is that you are not going to change somebody's mind with one conversation.
Mm.
You are not going to be. I mean, let's take this example of me talking to my past self. There is no way I'm going to say something to that past me, and he's going to go, "Oh yeah, yeah, you know what? I am going to throw away this wonderful community that I'm part of and change my entire perception of the universe." That is not going to happen. But what it does is it kind of prepares the ground. And that is what is so important, and why I'm so grateful to people like David Attenborough, for example, because every time he went evolution, 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 all of that was there. I knew what he was saying, and it was ready for when I was ready. So that's the first point.
Just keep at it. Just keep at it.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, just kind of think of your expectations. I mean, you might be frustrated with your QAnon loving relative or whatever, but they're not going to change their mind just because you've had a conversation with them.
Okay.
That's the first thing. The second thing is to get into them, to connect with them. The argument has to come from within their own world. And the only time I can remember being seriously shaken by an argument was when I was talking about my beliefs. I went to a small church called the Christadelphians. It's quite small, but it's all over the world. They're in the UK, Britain, Australia, and places. And I was talking about what I believed with somebody else, and he went, "Oh, so you only believe the first part of the book of Revelations, not the second part then?" And that hit me. I was like, "Oh, is that what I'm doing?" I mean, that was from my own world. And if I was talking to my past self, what I would do is get into their world, get into that world of creationism, and then say, well, look for the logical discontinuities, because they will have them. That's how we know things, the difference between things that are real and things that aren't real. Things that aren't real will have some logical problem in there somewhere. So for me, I mean, I'm going back to the UK in a couple of weeks, and I'll probably be meeting my alternative medicine fan relatives. And
good luck.
Well, yeah, and telling them that it doesn't work is going to be no use whatsoever. What's going to have to work is talking to them from the inside and saying, well, if da 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 da, then da da da. So what I would do, let's keep it with the creationism, for example, I would have to say, well, you have to admit that God went to a lot of effort to make it look like evolution is real, right? Because of this progression in the fossil record, and because of what we can do with DNA testing now, and we can see how the DNA changes with time. I said, you know, the more evidence we find, the more real it looks. So you have to admit that God's at least making it look that way, and he doesn't need to make it look that way.
Right.
You know, he could have just told us right there in the book of Genesis that he started with small animals and grew new animals out of the old ones. We don't need science to understand that story. And he must have known that millions or billions of people would lose their faith because of this problem. So why didn't he at least say something? And it has to be from within that world. With alternative medicine, for example, something I was saying to somebody once, which is, well, let's talk about what we agree. So we both agree that there are doctors out in the world who are through either incompetence or greed, are hurting their patients, right? We both agree that. What we disagree about is how many of them I think it's less than 1% of doctors. You think it's over 99%. And that's, you don't really need to add anything else into that. That's what's going to work in their brain, and it's not going to work immediately. But, and then you kind of move on to say, you know, something else. Say, well, why is it that you can get free health advice off the internet, except for when it's real medicine, but when it's alternative medicine, there's always a shop? Why is that? Why are those two things always connected? And, you know, that's where it has to come from. And that's what I take with me, is that you have to take your time, you have to be patient, and you have to argue from within their world, I think.
Speaking of which, David Farnell, who was here earlier through most of the interview with you, had to leave, but he left this as a parting message. I got to go, but this is a great interview. I look forward to watching the whole thing. So kudos.
Thanks,
to you.
David. Yeah, I know David very well. Thank you.
There you go. Now, but he also said at the end, and I think we can maybe leave this as sort of a parting point in the conversation. The thing I really want, this is David again, the thing I really want right now is how to talk to the rising number of people who are telling me we don't need to wear masks anymore. So just what you just said, is that still the same sort of logical sort of path to walk on in terms of just about any issue? In this case, David specifically points out, you know, wearing masks. How would you take what you just suggested in terms of trying to get into somebody's world, seeing it from their point of view? Or would you do it in a different way in the case of people who don't understand the necessity for wearing masks?
Yeah, there's kind of two things there. So the one situation is the situation that we've got now. And then the other situation is at the beginning of the pandemic, because these are two very different situations now. Okay, I'm talking as a chemist here, not as a medical professional, and certainly not as an epidemiologist. So this is the impression I get from the news stories that I've been reading. It seems to be that our ability, that with the vaccines and our ability to treat COVID infections, that many countries now are advising their populations that they don't need to wear masks. And these are countries with adults at the table. So, you know, America, for example, Joe Biden claimed said that the pandemic is over. I mean, it's not over, but it does at least seem to be at a situation where most people will be okay if they catch COVID. So I think if people really don't want to wear masks now, I don't think that's a big problem, in my opinion. I still do. There are a lot of people having problems with long COVID infections. So they didn't die, but they've lost all of their energy and they can't function. So this is still an ongoing problem with COVID. I would say that wearing a mask absolutely does reduce, let's say, your dose of droplets when you're breathing in. Now, again, I'm not a virologist, but as far as I can see, well, what certainly is true is that infection increases exponentially, which is the classic slowly, 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 then all at once. What that means is if your initial dose is here, you could well have 2 days before the infection takes off. And that gives your immune system that 2 days to realize there's something there and that it should start working and getting to work on this. Whereas if you are, for example, in a gym where people are breathing very heavily, there's a good chance you'll get a full breath of droplets, in which case you start here. And then straight, that virus has got that 2-day advantage before your immune system can work itself up. This is why diseases tend to, colds and things last for 2 or 3 days. It takes that long to get your immune system going. I could be wrong about that. All right. But as far as I can see, certainly my experience seems to be that, having a mask on, and people that wear masks seem to have less of a problem. So what it also, I do think that it has benefits. And if I'm in a crowded area like a subway, then I think it is beneficial. And I think there is room for differences of opinion on whether or not the Japanese government should tell people they don't need to wear masks anymore. I think there is room for that. But the more important example might be to go back to the beginning of the pandemic. And I did have friends back then that didn't want to wear masks and whatever. And what you have to be able to do is to keep reading reliable sources of information. And actually, this is something I'd like to mention briefly before we finish, is to keep reading reliable sources of information. Make sure that you know the facts before you get stuck with somebody who's read something on a blog and half remembered what was originally a lie anyway. And then kind of talk them through it. And when they say, well, it doesn't affect the virus, then you've got the facts and you can say, well, look, viruses are much smaller than the gaps between the fibers in the mask, but it's not a filter. It attracts them electromagnetically. That's what makes a medical mask a medical mask. And if you can stay calm, and instead of going, you're such an idiot, no, but just kind of keep it calm. This is just a conversation. This is, I'm not pushing anything on you. These are the facts. People are far more likely to listen. If you're keeping it calm and you're not getting het up and angry because they're being so stupid. So that's a really important thing. I'd like to mention this point about finding reliable sources of information, because, there are so many sources of information out there. How do you know what to trust? And the one thing that always stands out to me whenever I'm reading through something, whatever it's saying, what always grabs me is somebody that is putting forward both sides of the argument. And they are saying, yes, it's true that masks are not 100% effective, but they are at least 25% effective. Now, if you then have two people that are wearing masks, you've then now got 50% effectiveness against getting a COVID infection. I think actually the real stats are closer to 50%. So if you've got two people, if you've got one person wearing a mask, you get to flip a coin. And one time when you would have caught COVID, you won't catch it. If you've got two people wearing the mask, the person that you're talking to, you get to flip that coin twice. And if you get heads either of those times, you don't catch the infection. And and this is kind of how it works. So what you need to do is to what you're looking for here is somebody who's presenting both sides and say, yes, it's not going to stop you from getting COVID. It is going to reduce your chances. Nuclear power, for example, somebody that admits, hey, yes, nuclear power has its problems. We have had these accidents, but da, 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 da. And that is what you don't see from the unreliable sources. You just see this one, ba, 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 we shouldn't be wearing masks. They're no good. Ba, 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 nuclear power will kill everybody. It's polluting the environment. Ba, ba, ba. When you only get this one strong line of opinion, then I tend to find that a little bit suspicious.
I think it's also incumbent upon ourselves when, we're dealing with others as educators, as we were talking about earlier, to not fall into that trap, to end up becoming or coming off like those unreliable news sources and saying, "Oh, you're an idiot. No, you just don't understand anything because I know so much more than you."
Mhm.
We start becoming like those unreliable or just charlatan sources of information who are just trying to push one side. And I think part of that is going back to the old disciplines that we were probably given in first year university or in the last year of high school, is that, as you said, if you're going to write a good paper, you got to present both sides, present the thesis and the antithesis, and then show your conclusion as the synthesis. And I think a lot of us, when we get older and we start becoming more convinced of the fact that we've had successes in life, start to sort of move towards the idea that, well, most of my opinions are true, so probably all of my opinions are
Mm.
true. So I'm just going to start saying just my truth as truth. I don't have to temper it anymore. And
Yeah.
to lose that, I think, is a big blow to your own ability to see where the real problems are, because sometimes they lie within you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm, mm. Let's see, got a bit of a thing here from Adam. It's also a moving target. I think he was talking about the masks at this point. Oh, he was. Someday masks won't be needed. In the last year they totally were. So at some point that must change. And at that point, like, which side are you going to be on? Are you going to be starting to like rail on about masks when they're not necessary anymore? And I was thinking about that myself. Glenn has a final comment. This is what
Well,
I
actually,
meant.
sorry, Jose, if I can just make a point about that.
Sure.
What makes this whole thing so difficult, and the whole conversations all the way through COVID, was, are masks necessary? Do we need lockdowns? Well, it depends on how many deaths you're prepared to live with. And we say at some point masks won't be necessary. It also depends on how much personal risk you want to take about getting COVID. So for many people, they will consider that they are willing to take a high personal risk, and for the comfort of not wearing a mask. And this is, certainly, as you say, the risk is going to come down, but with COVID, it's not going to go away. Right. It's basically stuck with us now. So different people will have different opinions on how many people should die and how much personal risk we're prepared to put up with. But that is, it's I think now it's a difficult conversation.
It's a very difficult conversation because, like Adam says, it's a moving target. I don't want to keep stoking the fire or anything like that, but more so, not just personal risk. I wish people would sort of put into their calculus the idea that it's not just a matter of personal risk that I'm willing to put on my own shoulders, but people must understand the degree to which if they are willing to run around without a mask, how much they are spreading the virus and might send it out to some immunocompromised kid sitting just 1 meter away from you on the bus, or to your own grandmother. As soon as you come home from university and you haven't been wearing your mask properly, it's always below your nose, and you get it and you're okay because you're 19 years old. But then your grandmother, who up to this point didn't get a really bad dose of it, but this time from you, actually did get it. Now, it'll never be fully proven that it came fully from your nose, but you have to consider the risk, not just to yourself, but to the others around you. I think a little dash of empathy would be good there. Let's see. Glenn says, this is what I meant earlier by hedging and how imprecise science is. That has to be made clear. Sorry, Glenn, I don't remember exactly what that was in reference to. And then Adam comes back in and says, after the sun has supernova, COVID won't be a big worry. But yeah, fair point. he has such a way with words. Anything you want to tell us about presentations or upcoming videos, or like what's your video schedule like? Are you able to keep up that once a week schedule that you thought you'd be able to hit so easily?
I try to make it once every 2 weeks. So I put one up just last Friday was the last one. The next one, this Friday was my target. I don't think I'll hit that. Next Friday, 3/26. That's the word 3 space 26, all as one word. Stick that into YouTube and you'll find me.
And it's there inside the Facebook comments thread. And I'll make sure again that people get that. Quick question: who's your favorite science communicator?
David Attenborough.
Really? Is that because you're
Absolute, hands down, no question.
not Carl Sagan? Mine's Carl Sagan.
You know what? Carl Sagan was one of the first science communicators that connected with me. I loved his series. I loved Cosmos, and I actually started a astronomy club at school with my friend as a direct result of that series. It was fantastic. Neil deGrasse Tyson, also amazing. One of my favorites, there's Science Asylum. That's a news YouTube channel. They're really great. And one of my favorites channels is called Looking Glass Universe. This is a woman that goes into details about the maths of quantum mechanics. And I actually use her in one of my early chemistry lessons for basic chemistry, or rather I use a picture of her. And this came up because one day I had a lesson with just the female students, because the male students all had to go off and have a medical exam. So at first I thought I'll have a little bit of fun. I'll say, oh, it smells nicer in here today, or something like that. Then I thought, well, I'll have a talk with them about women in science and the challenges and difficulties that they'll face, and how I think that they can kind of manage their way through that and deal with it. And the more I thought of what I wanted to say, the more I realized it was actually the male students that needed to hear this. So I've forgotten her name. Oh, I totally know her name. I've forgotten her name. Anyway, Looking Glass Universe.
Oh, okay.
She I put up a picture of her on the screen, and then I asked them to guess what our connection is. And sure enough, nobody guesses that she teaches me quantum mechanics. Then I tell them what the connection is, and then I say, all right, out of her and me, who do you think will get a job teaching quantum mechanics? And I say, one of us looks like a professor. And I say, let's face it, it's going to be me. And she's the expert by a long, long way. And so we get into this, and then we get into, okay, what do you think about if a company just threw away 50% of its applicants? If it just took took those white envelopes, threw 50% away, and then looked at the rest of the applications, do you think that would be smart or stupid? Then explain to them that's exactly what happens. And then we get into it, and we have kind of a longer talk. But but the reason I brought her up is she's discussing mathematics, and I'm not great at mathematics, but she discusses it in a way that is just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It's a real skill at that level, being able to go from what in your head over here to what you expect your audience to be able to understand over there. And that there's such a difference. And she makes it look easy. Really good.
That's what I really like about both Sagan and Attenborough, is that not only do they have that skill, they both have beautiful lyrical voices that are just beautiful to listen to. And Carl Sagan had just the most beautiful way of turning a phrase, and everything Attenborough says, you can just imagine him just sort of like hiding behind the weeds as he's like watching that little spider monkey. Little hint for you. I remember now that we have another offshoot on Online Teaching Japan called Online Teaching Japan Off Topic. And I think it was there, someone was asking about science communication videos that are no more than 3 minutes long.
Well, there's 1 minute physics. That's that's the first one that comes to mind. Yeah, 1 minute physics.
Well, how about 1 minute chemistry?
Well, maybe I should do that. I could do that with shorts, couldn't I?
Yeah, you could. Like, just, I don't know. Well, you did a thing on the difference between atoms and molecules, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you condense that down into 1 minute, like the elevator spiel?
Yeah, you know what? I almost certainly could. That's a fantastic idea. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. Now you got two ideas: doing your own interviews and then 1 minute communication videos.
It's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you for showing up here on a weeknight and gracing us with your knowledge and your obvious passionate sort of devotion to the idea of trying to get people to understand a little bit more about something that actually runs our lives, which is the idea of reality and our ability to understand it through the process of science.
Mm.
I think it's something that we need to do more to talk between fields like this.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that maybe we started a little bit of something here.
Well, yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah. Thank you to everybody for letting me witter on like this, and thank you for your comments. I haven't had a chance to look through the chat, but what I did see looked pretty good. So thank you very much.
I always can kind of tell when people are really into a conversation, because if there's a lot of comments, that might be because there's a lot of opinions flying around.
Mhm.
But if there are no comments on what I feel is a really interesting conversation, it's because people are intently listening. And I
Mm.
think in that case, people were just really intently listening to this going, oh, I never knew that. So I think you really captivated people's imaginations and interests. Thank you very much
Yeah,
again.
thank you. Thanks.
Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to turn on their cameras so we can give Andy a proper wave off here. Otherwise, I want to say thank you and good night. And oh, there's Glenn. And I don't know if Adam is at his desk, but thanks, Glenn. Thanks for showing up. Everybody, good night. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Good night.